She married him to bear his heir. I really wish we could reach an agreement, she said, sitting by the fountain. Scene change. Paris returns to the palace with a gift. He is talking to himself. It will be difficult if I have to do the same thing as yesterday. I think I'll have to take it slow today. Paris, bashfully. But even if the same thing happens as yesterday, I won't hate it, but Paris looks at the gift in silence and tension. Seline comes out of her room. Paris is shocked and thinks to himself, is she planning to escape? Paris goes after her. Seline stops and fixes her hair. Paris, watching Seline from afar, thinking to himself, maybe she wants to impress someone. Whose room is this? Paris, shocked when Seline stops in front of his room, thinking to himself, damn, isn't this my room? Paris moves quickly in tension. Paris looks at Celine's room in tension, changes his mind and walks out quickly, thinking to himself, anyway, she can't enter my room without my permission. Manages to reach his room. Enters quickly without Seline seeing him. Places the gift. Goes to open the door for Seline. Opens the door forcefully. Says to Seline, come in. Seline looks at Paris in tension. Says, okay. Enters and sits by the fireplace. Seline and Paris look at each other. Seline smiles faintly and gestures for Paris to sit next to her. Paris looks at Seline in tension and then sits next to her. Moves closer to Seline. Seline smiles. Thoughts, he's just a cute teddy bear in my eyes. Looks at Paris shyly and says to herself, he changed his mind, and his attitude too. He looks very cute with this expression. Takes an apple out of her bag and says to Paris, I bought this today because I wanted to eat it with you. It looked delicious. Seline and Paris look at the apple. Seline starts eating the apple while Paris watches her in surprise. Paris does the same while Seline watches him. Suddenly laughs. Paris looks at Seline in tension and shyness, thinking to himself, why is she smiling? Maybe my face looks strange when I eat an apple. Says to Paris, I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable by laughing. It wasn't my intention, really. Shows Paris the reason for her laughter, which is the difference between her apple bite and his. Says to Paris, it's amazing that you can take so much in one bite. It must be because the size of our mouths is different. Paris feels embarrassed and tense, thinking to himself, but everything about you is small. Your mouth, your face, your height, even your hands. Says in shock and shyness. Maybe other places too. Suddenly gets up and Seline looks at him in surprise. Says to Seline, I prepared a gift for you. Seline claps her hands in excitement. Paris gives Seline the shoes. Seline says to Paris in joy, can I try it on now? Unable to try on the shoes because of her thick robe. Paris helps Seline put on the shoes, saying, I'll help you. Feels embarrassed as he holds Celine's foot, thinking to himself, she's really so small. Seline looks at Paris shyly, thinking to herself, he's really so big. Then he looked at her. And here Seline smiled at him and said, thank you, I really like them. And here Paris looked at the shoe while Seline was saying to herself, do they fit me well? And here Paris looked at her and said to himself, this, seriously, what? This woman? Why do I feel like I'm losing my mind as soon as she laughs? So shyly he pursed his lips and said to himself, I have to get a grip. Then he imagined her moving freely in her new shoes and said to himself, now that she has comfortable shoes, I'm sure she'll run away, but running away from the cold north without any way to contact you. Does that mean you hate me so much that you want to die? This person lives in his own drama. So he looked at her and said to himself, are you going to smile like this nicely in front of me and then run away? And here Seline said to him, let's finish eating together. And here Paris looked at her shyly and said to her, okay. Then he went back and sat down next to her. But this time, Seline leaned closer to him. And here Paris was shocked and looked at her nervously and then said to himself, what? What do you want to do with me? Why do you keep smiling at me? Why? While Seline was enjoying sitting next to him in silence, Paris was feeling tense and clenched his fists until they bled, saying to himself, "How on earth is the Duchess planning to spend the night here?" So he turned to her angrily and said, "Just go back to your room now." And when she did, he started saying to himself, "Paris, seriously, what are you doing?" Then he looked out the window and said to himself, "I was ready to deal with her if she ran away." And he closed the window and said to himself, "But if she really runs away, I don't think I'll be able to control my anger. Will she leave me behind?" And here he noticed that she had forgotten her coat. So he went and grabbed it, saying to himself, "I don't know what I want to do with that girl anymore." While Seline arrived at her room and threw her bag. In shock, she said to herself, the beast Duke, right? It is clear that Seline's impression is correct. Paris also perfectly matches the description in the novel. But why? Why is this happening? And here she was, shocked, as she said to herself, 3 nights have already passed, but the events of the original novel have not yet started. It is true that things were good at first, and I thought that they were taking care of me, so they delayed imprisoning me. And but a day and 2 days went by, and as time passes, I feel anxious. Then in shock, she said, "This is not consideration. Isn't something wrong?" And she imagined herself in an erotic situation with Paris, as she said to herself. In the novel, Seline's character was not revealed in detail. Since it was a long novel, was Seline originally not shy like me, but loved like the main characters, to the point that he could only imprison her? Because of her charming personality, and here she fell to the ground and said, "If so, my fate is sealed." Then she started crying and said to herself, I can't be the original Seline." And she remembered as she sat next to him and said to herself, "But the atmosphere between us today was different." Then she said shyly, "We were very close to kissing, but she was shocked when he just told her to go back now." So she started crying in frustration and said, I really wanted to be good. Did he really not feel anything? Am I the only one who wants to hug or kiss or even hold hands?" Then she broke down and started crying and said to herself, "I don't understand anything anymore." Then she looked at her new shoes and said, "Although I'm happy with this gift, but I heard that in Korea, if you give your lover shoes, they will run away. Could this gift have the same meaning here? I don't think it suits me either. You don't ask me to leave alone, do you?" And the next day, the assistant rushed to Paris and said, "My lord, last night I found a man." Paris looked at him angrily and said, "So what?" The assistant nervously said, "He is from the town of Kimberley, which is located in the southwest." Paris was shocked when the assistant said, "It is said that he came here to look for his fiancée named Seline, who disappeared even though they were not able to have an official ceremony, but they promised each other to marry." Said to himself, "I wondered if spring would finally come to my lord." And this is what happened. He meant that he thought he would be happy, but the opposite happened. Paris then said to him, "The earth's crust is melting these days, isn't it?" Gart was shocked and understood that he was going to bury his lover. He said to himself, "As expected. Are you planning to bury him?" And here he said to him, "Yes, it has been a month since the beginning of spring." Paris sighed and said, "Okay. I expected that. If she is beautiful in my eyes, she will be beautiful in the eyes of others too. I discovered it late, but is your beauty a crime?" Then he put on his coat and said, "So where is he now?" Gart said to him that he was in nearby lands, and here Paris smiled and said, "Even to come all this way here, love must have blinded him. I must take a look at his face to see what kind of man he is." And here the scene changes to Seline's fiancé in the novel, who started asking a person and said, "Have you heard? Miss Seline? I heard she got married." And her fiancé said in shock, "What?" Then he asked him and said, "Oh, where did she go?" And here he said to him, "It is said that she married a man with a great fortune far away in the north. Well, frankly, she doesn't deserve to rot in the countryside here. She has a precious fate." And her fiancé said, "That's right, but still." And here he started to imagine her, saying to himself, wearing expensive clothes and looking at precious flowers. An elegant tea-drinking life suits her more than anyone else. Is that enough for you? Are you happy now? You married a man from a rich family, and I'm an idiot and I didn't know that. Then he said to this person, "Please tell me more details." But this person said to him, "I don't know much either." And here Seline's lover traveled to her, saying to himself, "I just want to see her once. I don't know her exact location, but her face is not the kind that you can forget once you see it. I'll find her soon for sure." But Paris's followers met him and said, "We want you to come with us." And here they said to beat him and imprison him. And when Paris came to him, he started saying, "What is this? What do you want?" And here Paris looked at him and then said to his followers, "Start." And Seline's lover said, "No, don't do that. Don't do it." And here they forced him to drink this, and he started saying to them, "Leave me alone." But he became numb after drinking this drug. And here he said to him, "The town of Kimberlin, in the southwestern part of the country. Were you and a woman named Seline lovers who loved each other?" And here he remembered her and said to himself, "I want to live for you and for the children we will have." And here he said to him honestly, "Seline and I love each other, and we have sworn to be together forever." Paris glared at him and then left. His assistant, Yart, watched him nervously and thought to himself, "Oh my God, I thought it was a spring breeze, but it turned out to be a cold north wind. Aphelanon, a potion that temporarily removes the user's consciousness and allows them to tell the truth. Unless one is mentally strong enough to overcome this drug, what they say will be true. There are no prisoners from the enemy army here to satisfy the killing spirit of the master. I am the only one who can watch him closely to prevent his unexpected outbursts." Then he said nervously to himself, "You can do it, Jart. Cheer up, Jart." Paris looked at him and smiled, saying, "Yart, release him." Then he turned away and said, "Prepare the escape route." At the time, Seline went out with Anna. Seline was looking in amazement at the butterflies and said, "There is a butterfly. It seems that they are trying to cross the wall." And Anna, "Yes, that's right. As you can see, there are no flowers here. They instinctively try to climb over the castle wall." And here Seline looked at her and said, "I understand." And at the same time, she says to herself, "It's amazing. And in a way, it's like me. From birth to adulthood against my will, I was always thrown into a new environment and forced to survive." So, in defiance, she said to herself, "Don't lose, butterfly. You can do it. You and I will be happy in the end." And here she turned behind her and found Paris looking at her. He was shocked and felt tense and approached them. At the time, Seline said to herself, "I thought he was looking at me. But maybe I was imagining things, right?" But Paris was actually looking at her, and here he started saying to himself, "She's an amazing woman. Time flies when I look at you." Then he looked at her and said, "I'm sure the same applies to others too. If you hadn't been sold like that by a man who doesn't deserve to be your father, you would have spent some time with your loved ones, and if you grew up in a noble family, then it would not be strange if you were already married and had children. And I wonder what kind of faces you would whisper your love to the man you love. What if—" And here he got angry and said, "Why am I so angry? I want to destroy everything in front of me. How can I kill him in front of her eyes? How can I deal with it so harshly that she doesn't look at him again?" And here Seline was smiling at him while he continued to say to himself, looking at her, if she missed him even a little, even his bones would be ground up and sprinkled as food for wild animals. And here Seline lifted her dress to show him that she was wearing the shoes and smiled at him and said, "Does it fit me well?" And here, suddenly, the fire of anger that was burning was extinguished, and he looked at her in embarrassment, and Seline shyly said to him, "These are the shoes I bought for myself." And here Paris looked at her and said to himself, "To be honest, although I don't know anything about fashion, dresses and leather shoes don't go together at all, but—" And here he asked her and said, "Are they comfortable?" Seline smiled and said to him, "Yes, walking is much easier too. It's beautiful. And here Paris smiled and said to himself, walking easily will not be enough. She must run as fast as she can if she wants to get out of this castle. But Seline, when she encouraged and said, would you like to go out with me today? Paris was shocked, and then said to her, oh, where Seline started thinking and said, just anywhere doesn't matter. Any place would be great. And here Paris looked at her in silence, and suddenly he said, starting today, we plan to close the inner housing so that... And here Seline was shocked, and she felt tense and couldn't speak. And Paris said, you can stay in my inner dwelling. And here when she looked at him shyly, Paris closed his eyes and said to her, I'll just close it for a while because I have work to do, and since I won't continue more than a week. So what do you say? We go out horseback riding together after that. And here she smiled and said, great. And at the same time she started saying to herself, I thought he will lock me up again. At the time, Paris was looking at her smiling and saying to himself, maybe, from today, Seline might resent me for the rest of her life. It's okay, because I have no intention of sharing Seline with anyone else. And it would be better if she felt empty, sad, and depressed because of me. Even if her heart is small, it should not be directed towards another person. And here he looked at her in anger and said, I will see his death with my own eyes. Then his gaze changed and he said to himself, we need to get some fresh air. From what I've seen before, you seem to like the stars too, so I guess I'll have to go to the Bergvilla forest. Its night sky is famous for its clarity and beauty, so I'm sure she'll love it. And here they turned around when her lover arrived, and here Seline looked at him, and when she found him in a mess, she said to herself, what? Was he digging? But the only people who can enter the inner room are me, Barras, the neighbor, and I. Is he a servant? I don't know him. And here she couldn't recognize him, because she's not the real Seline, and also because she hasn't read the whole novel. So she looked at Barras and said to herself, no need to worry about him. Then she said, no, but I can't ride this horse. And Barras, now you said you can't ride a horse. And Seline was surprised by his reaction. She said, is it strange that I can't ride a horse? Then she was shocked and said to herself, why is he asking? Impossible? Can all the women here ride horses? Also, I've never experienced riding a horse before. And suddenly, when her lover approached, sat on the ground and called her name, she looked at him with concern. And here her lover shouted at her, I worked hard to come here just to meet you, and you don't even look at me. And here Seline said in tension to herself, what? What? Wasn't he a servant? Then in shock, she started saying to herself, has he ever appeared in the original story? I don't remember reading about him. Did he appear in the second season? So she went to hide behind Barras and said to herself, I don't know. And here her lover was shocked by her behavior. Then he said, trembling, and now that you're a married woman, you won't run to me and hug me. Can't you even say a few words to me? Then he looked at her angrily and said to himself, isn't it too much to change one's attitude so quickly? Isn't this reaction too much? And here Seline said to him, but Seline grabbed Barras and whispered to him, who is this? And here Barras. He said to her, I heard that he is your lover and you promised to be together in the future in your hometown. And Seline was stunned. She said to him, what did you promise me? And here Barras smiled and started saying to himself, when he came from behind me suddenly, I thought he was trying to stab me from behind for his lover. Honestly, I don't mind being stabbed, but since she hid behind my back to avoid that man, it means as if she chose me. And here he looked at her, happy and continuing, saying, she doesn't seem to have any feelings for that man. So he raised his fingers to his guards and said to them, take him out of here. And they did. But here Seline fell to the ground in tension. She said to herself, something is wrong. Then she looked at Barras and continued, saying to herself, honestly, if Barras knew that the past would have brought me together with that man, he would have buried him alive. And here she remembered and said, "Close the inner place. Is this a test for me?" Then she broke down in tears and continued saying to herself, "If that's really the case." And here, when Barras saw her in this state, he looked at her in tension and then bent down and said, "What happened to you?" "Suddenly. Seline? What happened just now?" Then she looked at him angrily and said to herself, "Am I? Did I make a mistake?" "No, not really." Then she said to him, "Were you trying to send me to that man?" And here Barras said to her, "I never thought of it that way." "But Seline," she said to him angrily, "a lie." And here Barras got angry and started saying to himself, "That's right, it's a lie. He tried to kill her right in front of my eyes." And here he said to her in tension, "Actually, he asked me to let him see your face just once." And here he looked at her and said, "But," suddenly, he was shocked by Celine's reaction when she shouted at him and said, "Is this what you'll do to everyone who asks to see my face? Wouldn't it be better to draw me in a large size and stick me on the castle gate?" But Barras told her, "Everyone said that he was your lover." And Seline said to him, "Did you just believe that? And you made me meet him like this, a man I don't even know his identity." And here Barras felt tense and began to say to himself, "I would never have said that." Then he turned to her and said, "They praised him. And Seline?" And here Barras said to her, "It's like when you drink. You can never lie." And anyway, what he said was the truth. And here Seline lowered her head to the ground and said to herself, "That's right. In the end, it's a fantasy world. If this person is Celine's real lover." Then she started crying again and said, "If you say it doesn't matter if I met my ex-boyfriend, are you that indifferent to me?" And here Barras was looking at her in tension and saying to himself, "Why doesn't she stop? If she keeps crying, it will affect her body." I feel tense and frustrated. And here the scene changes, and Barras is drinking. And the assistant looks at him silently, then says to him, "Sir, you have drunk a lot." But Barras tells him to be quiet. And here the neighbor starts looking at him as he drinks and says to himself, "Doesn't this fool know that he has loved Her Majesty for several days? We used to hear screams if he saw him come to the door only. What kind of man in the world allows the girl he loves to see her ex-boyfriend? At least don't make a fuss. Can't you sit still?" Then he sighed and said, "How can his thoughts only go in this negative and violent direction? You're just showing perverted possessiveness." And here he whispers to him, "Sir, they say that Her Majesty is not eating well." And here Barras felt ashamed and said, "If she comes?" He smiled at him and said, "What about bringing some soup to her bedroom?" But Barras looked at him and said angrily, "Do you think I'm a servant?" But he went to her with the soup anyway, and here he began to say to himself in tension, "She didn't eat anything. I don't know where she got the strength to keep crying all day." And he started thinking and saying, "What if she cried this way after seeing her ex-boyfriend? It's clear who she's thinking of when she cries the nasty things she says. It's not for that man. It's for me." And here he knocked on her door and said to himself, "Instead of crying and thinking about that man, I wish she would cry because she was disappointed in me." Then he entered her room with the soup and said, "You should eat something." And here Seline felt embarrassed and covered herself up, then said to him, "Why are you here?" And Barras put down the soup and said, "They say you don't go out." And Seline turned to the other side and said to him, "Who cares? The inner wing is closed anyway." And here Barras was silent for a bit and looked at her and said to himself, "Even though she's not afraid of me or thinks I'm a scary person, I have an inner feeling. And now I can say everything I want to say without that feeling." And here, when Seline looked at him with an angry face, Barras turned his face to the other side and laughed in embarrassment and said to himself, "She is so cute." While Seline was looking at him angrily, and when she saw him like that, she said in surprise, "What? If you have something to say, just say it. Why is he doing this?" And she remembered him putting on her shoes, and she said to herself, "If that's the case, why did you give me jewelry as a gift? And why did you give me those shoes? And why did you ask me to hold your arm? And why did you hug me when I fell?" So she said angrily, "Why am I so unlucky? Am I a fool who doesn't know anything?" And here she said, looking at him angrily, "Aren't his actions very clear?" And suddenly Paris started thinking and then said, "I'll open the door again. Keep your promise to go horseback riding together." And here Seline said to him, "When will we go?" Then they looked at each other for a while. Paris said, "Now." Seline was in shock. "What?" She did so and put on her riding clothes. Suddenly she said angrily, "No. Is this situation real?" She remembered how she was saying, "I was crying like this. How come you didn't ask me once if I was okay?" I didn't expect that from him, but is it that hard to wipe away a single tear for me? Then she went to Paris, boiling with anger, and said to herself, Nothing." Here, Paris looked at her and thought, so this is Seline in Paras's eyes. Here, he turned to the other side, smiling shyly and saying to himself, "Those clothes look good on her too." But he didn't notice how angry she was. At this time, the assistant Gart was looking at them. Then he put his hand on his face in frustration and said to himself, "We have a long time to go." While Paris was thinking to himself, Camille City is a small town, so there are no suitable roads for carriages. Seline said that she couldn't ride a horse, but that couldn't be true. How else did she get around in that small town? Everyone must have ridden horses there. I just want her to have healthy children, he thought. And I didn't look into her past. I brought her here without knowing anything about it, but I'm happy anyway. If we knew that past, he said, we would never have brought Seline's neighbor here. That makes me happy, he said. And then he said to her, "Take the white horse." But when Seline looked at it, she said nervously to herself, "It already has so much on its back. Is that okay?" Then she said to him, "I think I would be too heavy for the horse if I rode it." But Paris laughed at her words and said, "Even if 5 people like you rode the horse, it wouldn't make a difference. Don't worry." And so he watched her and thought to himself, what could a woman who looks lighter than a cake do? And here Seline began to say to herself, "I'm in big trouble." She was looking at the horse and thinking, this horse is bigger than I thought. I really don't think I can ride this horse. Won't I die if I ride this horse? It's so scary that it hurts my pride to say something like this, but I don't think it's true at all. And then she grabbed him and said, "I can't ride this horse." But Paris just looked at her and laughed, and Seline began to say to him, "I really can't ride it." And at the same time, she was thinking to herself, this is the truth. So Paris said, "Well, what about learning to ride a horse and going out again another day? Or not? You can ride the same horse as me." And here Seline agreed and said, "Yes." But in her head she was feeling embarrassed and thinking to herself, what's this? Riding a horse together, doesn't that mean he's going to hug me? I shouldn't misunderstand. But he's pressing the green light. Why do you pretend not to notice in important moments? Is this the evil and attraction I've heard about? Aren't you exaggerating your actions for something like this? So she said, feeling embarrassed. Now that I'm ready, you should go. What should I do? And here Seline got on the horse, and suddenly Paris lifted her onto the horse. Then he said to her, "Hold the reins tightly and put your foot in the stirrup." And Seline said, "Yes." And here, when Paris got on behind her, she felt embarrassed. And Paris said, "We're going to move." And Seline began to say to herself, "In a way, I feel reassured. Paris is the strongest hero in the novel in this world. Does that make me the female heroine? I was so angry earlier. It doesn't really matter anymore." At this time, Paris was feeling nervous and thinking to himself, I'm in big trouble. I didn't think about this problem. Too close. Then, embarrassed, he said, "She smells sweet. How can your back be so soft?" First of all, the real problem is that Seline is wearing riding pants, and they are made of thin fabric. And here he blushed, saying, "We're getting close to each other. I mean, there's—" At this time, the assistant Jart was preparing the carriage to go after Seline and Paras. And here Anna came and asked him, "Do you want to use the carriage?" And Jart said, "Oh yes, my master asked me to prepare the carriage." And here Anna was silent for a moment and then said to him, "When will you leave?" And Jart said, "In the evening." But Anna looked at him and said, "You're not really planning to leave in the evening without warning, are you?" And here Jart looked at her nervously. So Anna sighed and then said to him, "Go early tomorrow and you must be there by dawn." And Jart said, "Yes." And here Anna left, saying, "That's better for him too." And she was saying to herself, "That's why he hasn't gotten married yet, because he didn't understand that he needs to give Paris and Seline some time alone." However, he was feeling shocked and thinking to himself, "Oh my God, master's orders." But when he remembered that Paris trusted Anna as much as she trusted him, he said, "I'll do what you say." "I'm sorry, master. This is better, isn't it?" And when night fell, Paris was sitting next to Seline in front of the fire. And here, when Seline said to him, "It's cold," Paris said to her, "Come closer." And he hugged her and covered her up, saying, "I told him to take us in the evening, but I think there's a problem." And here Seline smiled at him and said, "It's okay. The weather is nice." And here Paris turned the other way, feeling embarrassed, and thought to himself, "Jart did well." And here Seline will explain to us what happened to them and say, "Hello, I'm Seline. Let me explain what happened to me today. I couldn't ride the horse. So I ended up coming to La Villeberg in Paras's arms. We arrived at a beautiful wooden cabin in the forest. And here Paras got her off the horse. And here the two of them were feeling embarrassed and saying, 'Great, the cabin is great.' And Paras said, 'What about having a barbecue for dinner?' And when night fell, they got closer, and then Paris said to her, 'What about alcohol? It will warm your body up.' And here Seline smiled and said to him, 'That would be good.' And she remembered how she was in her previous life and thought to herself, 'When I was in Korea, I tended to drink a lot of alcohol. I could easily drink 3 bottles of soju myself. Everything will be fine, right?' And here Paris asked her and said to her, 'Have you ever drunk it?' And here Seline smiled and said, 'I don't like wine.' And here he looked at her with a scary look and said, 'If wine isn't your favorite thing, what about whiskey?' And here she said to him, 'Great.' And Paris poured her a drink in silence while she was feeling happy and saying, 'Wow, whiskey, first time I've ever had it.' And here Paris was watching her drink and was saying to himself, 'Seline, you said you enjoyed drinking wine in your town, and the Lafon district wine in particular, which I just brought, was her favorite. It is the weakest type of alcoholic wine in the country.' And he was surprised that she refused it even though she loved it. And here he said to her, 'Would you like another drink?' And Seline said happily, 'Yes, it's very delicious.' And here Paris say, 'There are many small animals here.' Seline, 'Do you mean squirrels or hedgehogs?' Paris sighs and smiles. 'I mean rabbits or foxes.' Paris, approaching her, 'I should have prepared the bow so I could go hunting. Do you like hunting?' Looks at her silently, waiting for her response. Seline, feeling shy and clearly affected by the drink. She thought to herself, 'This is the kissing corner, isn't it?' Seline, looking at him. Those serious eyes, and this atmosphere. Things are different than before. 'Ah, I didn't want to get my first kiss after drinking. I don't have a choice.' And here she woke up from her dream and got up, saying to him, 'The hunt.' But suddenly she felt dizzy and said to him, 'I've never done this before.' And here Paris held her, and Seline fell into his arms happily, and Paris carried her and looked at her, saying to himself, 'I don't think you're very good at drinking. Anyway, this is not an illusion.' And he began to remember, saying, 'Before the wedding, on the first day, and a week after that.' I don't know who, or how, or why, but what is certain is that Seline has changed. Then he imagined her like this and said, she's definitely a witch. Maybe it's not a coincidence that I felt like I was possessed several times. And here he took her to the hut and looked at her, saying, if this woman is a witch, then where is the real Seline? Can I find her? And suddenly when Seline said, it's cold, Paris looked at her shyly and began to say to himself, I'm sure Seline wears a jacket, and she even wears an abaya. How does she feel about this? Then he said angrily, blushing with embarrassment, it's clear that this woman is a witch. I don't know what she did to me. What a witch! And the day dawned on him without sleep, and he continued, saying, well, what if this woman is a witch? All kinds of witches in the world control empires, and at best, someone like me is controlled. It's a big problem. Then he looked at her and said, anything is better than that woman. However, I must find the real Seline. And here he heard a voice outside and said, neighbor, it seems you finally arrived. And here when Seline woke up and got up and didn't find Paris. She said in shock to herself, did I wake up too late? Where did Paris go? He wouldn't leave me behind, would he? And here she left the room and heard Paris say to his neighbor, since before our wedding ceremony, and after that, I've been looking for any witches or sorcerers. And she came in surprise and said, why witches all of a sudden? And here Paris said to him, I think Seline was switched on our wedding day. We need to find the real Seline. And here when Seline heard this, she was shocked, while the neighbor said, impossible. There is no sign of a break-in at the palace. And here Paris began to think, saying to him, it is likely that only the soul was replaced, not the body. And if we find a sorcerer or shaman in the palace, with their help it will be easy to find the real Seline. And here Jarrett noticed Seline and said, your Majesty, here you are. And here she came out to them, looking at Jarrett, and Paris said to her, this young man is Count Jarrett Hein Orgus. You will meet him often, so be sure to remember his name. And Jarrett said, we've met before, haven't we? Anyway, it's an honor to meet you. And Seline, when she said to him, it was a pleasure to meet you too. I wish you well in accomplishing your tasks. And here Jarrett suddenly turned to Paris and looked at him as if to say that he was right about her not being Seline. So Paris began to say, Jarrett and Seline may have already met before in their hometown, and he was the one who brought her in the first place. And they had talked several times before the wedding ceremony. So, why is he acting strange now? There's no need to think about that anymore.